I want you to take a good look at this helmet. This is a Gentex Ops Core Level 3A ballistic protection. It's designed to stop a .44 Magnum round at point-blank range. It's designed to survive shrapnel from an IED. But look at this groove here. Look at the compression fracture on the temporal plate. A bullet didn't do this. A bear didn't do this. A bear bites with puncture force. It doesn't crush military-grade composite like it was a soda can. This was done by a hand. A hand with opposable thumbs and the grip strength of a hydraulic press. My name is Miller. I spent 12 years in Force Recon. I've hunted men in the Arghandab Valley, and I've tracked high-value targets through the jungles of South America. I know what a predator looks like. People ask me where the missing hikers go. They ask about the missing 411. They think people just get lost, or fall into ravines, or get eaten by cougars. They are wrong. We didn't just see a Bigfoot. We didn't just take blurry photos. My team executed a textbook ambush on a 9-foot alpha male in the Cascade Mountains. We brought it down. We chained it up. And what we found in its lair, the reason why it was taking people, is something that will make you never want to step foot in a national park again. They aren't just killing us. They are harvesting us. I run a private extraction team called Phoenix Group. We don't advertise. You won't find us on Google. We get hired by families who have too much money and not enough answers. When the local sheriff calls off the search after 72 hours, when the dogs lose the scent, that's when my phone rings. Last November, we were contracted by a tech mogul from Seattle. His 22-year-old daughter, Jessica, had vanished while solo hiking near Mount Rainier. The police said she slipped and fell into a river. Case closed. Her father didn't buy it. He wired $500,000 to my offshore account and gave me one order. Bring her back, dead or alive. I took 4 men with me, top-tier operators, rangers, SEALs, guys who don't panic when the bullets start flying. We went in heavy, thermal optics, suppression weapon systems, and encrypted comms. We treated it like a hostage rescue in hostile territory. We thought we were hunting a serial killer or maybe a cartel grow-op protecting their stash. We were arrogant. We walked into that forest thinking we were the top of the food chain. But 20 miles deep into the no-go zone, we found tracks, not boot prints, bare feet, 22 inches long, and we found markers, twisted saplings, rock stacks, that looked like perimeter warnings. We weren't hunting a wild animal. We were walking into a fortified defensive position. What I'm about to tell you is a violation of 3 different non-disclosure agreements and probably a treason charge. But the families of the missing deserve to know. Jessica wasn't dead when we found her. And she wasn't alone. The difference between a search party and a hunting party is the ammunition. When you go looking for a lost hiker, you pack extra water, flares, and a first aid kit. When you go looking for the thing that took the hiker, you pack 5.5 diameter green tip rounds and level 4 ceramic body armor. We inserted at 400 hours. The drop zone was a logging road 10 miles north of the target area in the Cascade foothills. It was cold. That damp, bone-chilling cold you only find in the Pacific Northwest. The helicopter didn't touch down. We fast-roped onto the gravel, our boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud, weighed down by 80 pounds of gear each. As the chopper lifted off and disappeared into the gray morning mist, the silence came crashing back down on us. That's the first thing you notice in the red zone. It's not the noise, it's the lack of it. My team was hand-picked for this. Russo, my point man, was an ex-Army Ranger who had done 3 tours in the Korengal Valley. He could spot a disturbed leaf from 50 yards away. Tex, our heavy gunner, was former DevGru. He carried an MK-48 machine gun like it was a toy. Doc, our medic, had patched up more IED victims than he cared to count. And Svensson, our tracker. He wasn't military. He was a professional hunter from Zimbabwe who had spent the last decade tracking poachers. He was the only one of us who wasn't carrying an assault rifle. He carried a high-caliber lever-action guide gun, 45-70 government. Big, slow bullets, he told me once, for big, slow things. We did a comms check, whispers only. We engaged our thermal optics. The world turned into a wash of gray and white through the monocles of our night vision. Miller to team, I whispered into the boom mic. Rules of engagement are yellow. We don't know what we're dealing with yet. But if it has teeth and it comes at you, put it down. Oscar Mike. We moved out in a standard Ranger file, spacing 5 meters between men. The terrain was brutal. It wasn't just walking. It was fighting through a wall of rhododendrons and devil's club, slipping on wet shale and moss that had been growing since the Ice Age. For the first 3 hours it was a standard hump, just hard work. But as we crossed the ridgeline and descended into the valley where Jessica's GPS beacon had last pinged, a place the locals called the Basin, the atmosphere shifted. It's hard to explain to a civilian, but when you've spent enough time in war zones, you develop a sixth sense. It's actually just your subconscious processing micro-information. Smells, sounds, shadows. The hair on my arms stood up. The air felt pressurized, like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks. Russo halted the column with a raised fist. I moved up to his position. He was kneeling in the mud, staring at a cluster of young Douglas fir trees. "Boss," Russo whispered, not taking his eyes off the trees. "Look at this." It wasn't a track. It was a marker. 3 trees, each about the thickness of a baseball bat, had been snapped. But they weren't snapped by the wind, and they weren't cut by a saw. They were twisted. The wood fibers were corkscrewed, exploded outward from extreme torque. Someone or something had grabbed these trees 7 feet off the ground and twisted them until they shattered, just to mark a territory. Svensson ran his hand over the splintered wood. He smelled his fingers. "Sap is fresh," he murmured. "Maybe 2 hours. And look at the height, 7 feet up. That's leverage. No bear does this. A bear bites and scratches. This is mechanical manipulation. This is a signpost." "A signpost for what?" Tex asked, scanning the tree line with his heavy machine gun. "For us," Svensson said grimly. "We just crossed the perimeter. We kept moving, but the formation tightened. We went from travel mode to combat patrol. Fingers moved from the trigger guards to the triggers. Every shadow looked like an ambush. The forest got darker as we went deeper into the basin. The canopy was so thick it blocked out the midday sun, keeping us in a perpetual twilight. The smell changed too. The clean scent of pine was replaced by something musky, like wet dog and copper. At 1300 hours we found the kill site. It wasn't dramatic. It was a small clearing near a riverbed. We found Jessica's backpack first. It was sitting upright against a rock, almost like it had been placed there. I signaled the team to hold perimeter security while I approached the bag. I checked for tripwires. Old habits die hard, but it was clean. I opened it. Wallet, keys, energy bars, a rain jacket, expensive gear, but the water bottle was full. "She didn't run," I said over the comms. "She was taken fast." Then I saw it. About 10 feet away, pressed deep into the blue-gray river clay, was a single footprint. I've seen bear tracks, I've seen cougar tracks, I've seen hoaxes made with wooden cutouts. This was none of those. It was 22 inches long. I put my own boot next to it, a size 12 tactical boot, and it looked like a child's shoe. The print was deep, suggesting massive weight, maybe 800 pounds or more. But the detail is what froze my blood. The mud had captured the dermal ridges, the fingerprints of the foot. I could see the texture of the skin. I could see the mid-tarsal break, a joint in the middle of the foot that humans don't have, allowing the creature to grip the ground like a vice. "Doc, get photos," I ordered. "Svensson, what do you make of it?" Svensson was pale. He was staring at the brush on the other side of the river. "He stopped here," Svensson whispered. "He stood here and watched her. He didn't stalk. He waited." "He?" I asked. "Alpha," Svensson said. "Look at the toe splay. This is a dominant male, and he's not alone." "Contact right," Tex hissed. We all spun. Through the dense fern wall about 50 yards to our 3 o'clock, something had moved. It wasn't a squirrel. It was big enough to block out the light. I brought my rifle up, activating the PQ-15 laser. The red dot danced on the leaves. "Identify," I shouted. "Come out with your hands up." Silence. Then from the left flank, completely the opposite direction, came a sound. Click, clack. It sounded like 2 river stones being smashed together. Hard, percussive. Then from behind us, whoop, a low, wood-knocking sound. My stomach dropped. I realized instantly what was happening. They weren't just watching us. They had been tracking us since the twisted trees. They had let us walk right into the center of the clearing. "Collapse the perimeter," I yelled. 360 security, back to back. The team moved instantly, forming a tight diamond formation, weapons facing outward. We were the apex predators of the modern world. We had night vision, thermal, automatic weapons, and centuries of military doctrine. But in that dark, wet valley, standing over the footprint of a monster, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a rookie in the desert. I felt like prey. Russo was scanning with the thermal scope. "I can't get a lock," he panicked. "I see heat signatures popping up and disappearing. They're using the mud. They're masking their heat. Boss, how many are there?" "Eyes open," I commanded, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Watch the trees, not just the ground. Watch the damn trees." And then I saw him, directly across the river, standing partially obscured by a massive cedar trunk. He wasn't hiding. He was just standing there, perfectly still, blending in with the bark and the shadows so well that he was invisible until he opened his eyes. Yellow, burning amber eyes. He was at least 9 feet tall. His shoulders were 4 feet wide. He looked like a tank covered in hair. He looked at me, then looked at the rifle in my hand, and he didn't flinch. He bared his teeth, not in a smile but in a threat display. Then he threw his head back and let out a roar that vibrated in my chest cavity. It wasn't a movie sound. It was a physical blast of pressure, a mix of a lion's roar and a human scream. "Contact front," I screamed. "Engage! Engage!" The forest exploded with gunfire, but as the brass casings hit the mud, I knew one thing for sure. We weren't hunting him. He was hunting us. There is a saying in the Corps, "No plan survives first contact with the enemy." That is usually true. But in this case, our plan didn't just fail to survive. It was ripped apart, chewed up, and spit back in our faces. When I gave the order to engage, the forest turned into a strobe light of violence. Tex opened up with the MK-48. It's a belt-fed 7.62mm machine gun designed to suppress enemy infantry squads. It chops down small trees. It punches through cinder blocks. He walked a burst of tracers right into the chest of the Alpha standing across the river. I saw the rounds hit. I saw tufts of fur explode like gray mist. I saw the creature jerk backward under the kinetic impact. But he didn't go down. A human being, even one on PCP, goes down when you put 3 rounds of 7.62 into his center mass. The hydrostatic shock liquefies organs. This thing, it just got angry. The Alpha didn't run away. He charged. He crossed that 20-foot river in a single leap, splashing down into the mud on our bank with the weight of a compact car. The ground actually shook. I felt the tremor through the soles of my boots. "Flash out!" Russo screamed, pulling the pin on an M84 stun grenade. He tossed it at the creature's feet. Bang. The flashbang delivers 170 decibels of sound and a blinding magnesium flash. Under night vision goggles, that flash is blinding. Our goggles auto-gated, dimmed instantly to protect our eyes, but the creature had no such protection. It screamed, a high-pitched shriek of pain, and swiped blindly at the air. "Shift fire! Shift fire!" I yelled, trying to coordinate the chaos. But we weren't fighting a lone animal. We were fighting a squad. From the ridge to our right, a projectile came whistling through the air. It wasn't a bullet. It was a granite river rock, the size of a bowling ball. It slammed into Tex's shoulder. I heard the crack of the clavicle snapping over the sound of the gunfire. Tex went down hard, his machine gun clattering into the mud. "Man down! Tex is down!" Doc screamed, dragging him behind a large cedar stump. The Alpha recovered from the flashbang faster than any biological organism should. He locked his eyes on me. I was the leader. He knew that. He could smell the authority. Or maybe he just didn't like the way I was shining a laser in his face. He closed the distance 30 feet in 2 strides. I switched my AR-15 to semi-auto and started drilling failure drills. 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. Pop, pop, pop. The headshot glanced off his skull. I swear to God it ricocheted. His brow ridge was so thick, so sloped, that the 5.56mm round just carved a trench through the skin and deflected. Then he was on me. The smell hit me first. It was a wall of rot, bad breath, unwashed musk, and the copper tang of old blood. He backhanded my rifle. The force was unimaginable. It ripped the weapon out of my hands, tearing the sling mount right off the receiver. My rifle flew 20 feet into the darkness. I drew my sidearm, a SIG P226, but before I could bring it up, a massive hand wrapped around my torso. It didn't feel like a hand. It felt like hydraulic rescue jaws. His fingers were thick, leather-skinned, and cold. He lifted me, 220 pounds of marine and gear, off the ground like I was a doll. I looked right into his face. This wasn't a blurry shape in a Patterson-Gimlin film. This was a face. The skin was charcoal black, leathery, and covered in scars. The nose was flat and broad, nostrils flaring. The teeth were yellow, blocky, and broken. But the canines were 2 inches long. And the eyes, those amber eyes, they weren't wild. They were hateful. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated malice. He was going to squeeze me until I popped. "Doc! The solution!" I choked out, unable to breathe. Doc broke cover. He was the only one with the monster killer. We had come prepared for a capture, not just a kill. Doc was carrying a modified dart gun, a CO2-powered projector loaded with a syringe of carfentanil. For those who don't know, carfentanil is a synthetic opioid. It is 10,000 times more potent than morphine. A grain the size of a pinch of salt will kill a human in minutes. We were using a dose meant to drop a bull African elephant. The alpha saw Doc moving. He roared and raised me up, preparing to throw me at the medic. Thump. The sound of the dart gun was pathetic compared to the gunfire. Just a soft puff of air. But the aim was true. The dart, tipped with a 3-inch needle, slammed into the creature's neck, right into the jugular vein complex. The alpha froze. He looked surprised. He dropped me. I hit the mud hard, gasping for air, rolling away instinctively. The creature reached up and ripped the dart out of his neck. He looked at it, then looked at Doc. He took a step forward, raising a fist to crush Doc into paste. Then the chemistry took over. His eyes rolled back. His knees buckled inward. He swayed like a skyscraper in an earthquake. He let out a low, confused moan, a sound that was almost human. Then, gravity won. 900 pounds of apex predator crashed face first into the forest floor. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" I croaked, my ribs burning. The silence that followed was heavy. The birds didn't start singing again. The woods were dead silent, terrified of the violence that had just happened. "Status!" I barked, getting to my feet, my hand still on my pistol. "Tex is hurt bad," Russo said, kneeling over our gunner. "Broken collarbone, maybe a concussion, but he's conscious." "Svensson, watch the perimeter," I ordered. There were others. The rock thrower. "They're gone," Svensson said, scanning the ridge with his thermal. "They saw the big man go down, they pulled back, they're regrouping." I walked over to the fallen alpha. Even unconscious, he was terrifying. He was lying on his stomach, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. I approached him cautiously like you approach an IED. "Cuff him," I said. "Use the heavy chains." We carried industrial logging chains and customized oversized handcuffs for this exact scenario. It took 3 of us to pull his arms behind his back. The muscle density was insane. It was like trying to bend steel cables. His arms were as thick as my thighs. As I was ratcheting the cuffs tight, I got my first good look at his anatomy. His hands were human. 5 fingers. Thumb. Fingernails that were black, thick, and claw-like, but manicured by wear and tear. The fur was oily and water-repellent. Underneath it I could feel scars, old knife wounds, bullet holes from previous encounters. This guy was a veteran of something. But then I saw it, something that stopped my heart. Buried deep in the matted fur around his neck, almost invisible, was a thin blue line. I pulled out my tactical knife and carefully lifted the fur. It was a lanyard, a cheap blue nylon lanyard, the kind you get at corporate retreats or tech conferences. It had been tied together with a complex knot, a knot that required dexterity to tie, a square knot, and dangling from it, smeared with mud and grease, was a plastic ID card. I wiped the mud away with my thumb. The face on the ID was smiling. Blonde hair, blue eyes. Jessica, intern, Cyberdyne Systems. I held the tag up for the team to see. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from rage. "He didn't just kill her," I whispered. "He kept a trophy." Svensson walked over, his face grim. He looked at the creature, then at the ID card. "It's worse than that, Miller," he said softly. "What do you mean?" Svensson pointed to the ground leading away from the clearing. "Look at the drag marks. He came from the north, but look closely at the trail." I followed his gaze. There was a wide swath of crushed ferns leading up the hillside, vanishing into the dark timber. "He was dragging something to here?" I asked. "No," Svensson said. "He was patrolling. But look at the mud on his legs. It's gray clay, subterranean clay. The kind you only find deep underground in the old mines. Svensson knelt down and picked up a clump of the clay that had fallen off the creature's foot. He crushed it. He smells like the mine, Svensson said. But he also smells like ammonia. Ammonia? Urine, Svensson said. Concentrated urine. Like a den. Or a prison. I looked at the ID card again. You think she's alive? I asked. I think this lanyard wasn't taken off a corpse, Svensson said darkly. The clasp is still intact. If he ripped it off a dead body, it would have snapped. He untied it. Or, she gave it to him. Why would she give it to him? To buy time, Svensson said. Or to mark him, so someone like us would find it. I looked up at the dark mountain looming above us. The kill zone wasn't here. This was just the patrol route. The real horror was wherever this thing slept. Russo, Doc, I commanded. Stay here. Guard the package. If he wakes up, hit him with another half dose. Do not let him go. Where are you going? Doc asked, looking at the dark tree line nervously. I checked the magazine in my pistol and grabbed Tex's thermal imager. Svensson and I are going to follow the trail, I said. If Jessica is in a hole somewhere, she's waiting for us. And we are going to burn the whole damn nest down to get her back. We stepped past the unconscious giant and into the deep timber. The trail was easy to follow. It was a highway of broken dreams leading straight into the heart of the earth. We had a saying in recon, if you catch a tiger, you better don't let go of the tail. We had the alpha chained up. We used high-tensile logging chains wrapped around a massive Douglas fir and secured them to his wrists and ankles. We zip-tied his thumbs together, because if a creature has opposable thumbs, it can undo a knot. While Svensson was prepping the gear for us to track the trail, I took 5 minutes to inspect what we had actually caught. I need you to understand the biology here. This wasn't a monkey. I've seen chimps. I've seen gorillas in the Congo. They have a specific skeletal structure. Long arms, short legs, barrel chests, and a distinct simian face. This thing was different. I shined my flashlight into its face. The skin was slate gray, almost blue in the cold light. It was thick, like rhino hide, but covered in fine, vellus hairs that trapped heat. The face was undeniably human. Archaic, yes. Brutal, yes. But human. He had a high forehead, not the sloped skull of an ape. That means frontal lobe capacity. That means logic, planning, complex thought. I pried his lip up with the barrel of my pistol. His teeth were omnivorous. Molars for grinding plants, but the front was a slaughterhouse. Canines the size of railroad spikes. And stuck between them, fibers. Not just meat, synthetic fibers, polyester, the kind found in hiking jackets. Doc, I whispered, waving the medic over. Look at the ears. Doc leaned in. They're small, he noted. No lobes. But look at the canal. It's huge. Parabolic hearing, I said. He can hear a twig snap a mile away, and the nose. Look at the nasal cavity. It's wide. He's an olfactory hunter. He smells fear. But the most terrifying part was the hands. I picked up his left hand. It was cold and heavy. The palm was calloused so thick it felt like wood. But the dermal ridges, the fingerprints. I pulled out my ink pad. We carried them for biometric confirmation of targets, and pressed his thumb onto a piece of waterproof paper. I looked at the swirl, whirls and loops. Just like us. We didn't catch an animal, I said, my voice hollow. We caught a cousin, an ugly, steroid-pumped cousin. That's when he woke up. Carfentanil is supposed to keep an elephant down for an hour. The alpha had metabolized it in 10 minutes. His eyes snapped open. There was no grogginess, no where am I confusion. Instant clarity, instant rage. He tested the chains. He didn't thrash wildly. He pulled. A slow, hydraulic testing of the tensile strength. The steel groaned. The tree he was chained to, a fir tree 2 feet thick, shuddered, needles raining down on us. Contact, Russo yelled, bringing his rifle up. Don't shoot, I ordered. He's secure, just back up. The alpha stopped pulling. He realized he couldn't break the steel. He looked at me. He looked at the gun. And then, he did something that made Tex, who was lying wounded against a log, start crying. The creature opened his mouth. I expected a roar. Instead, a sound came out, a soft, high-pitched, trembling sound. Please. I froze. My blood turned to slush. It wasn't his voice. It was a recording. It sounded exactly like a young woman. It had the vocal fry, the pitch, the terror. Please, my leg, it hurts. Daddy? Doc dropped his medical kit. Jesus Christ, he whispered. Is that Jessica? The creature looked at Doc. He saw the reaction. He saw the horror in our eyes. And he smiled. A wide, toothy grin that didn't reach his eyes. He changed the channel. Unit 4 Alpha. Radio check. Over. That was my voice. He had heard me talking on the comms earlier. He had recorded it instantly, processed it, and was now playing it back to us with perfect fidelity. Help! Help me! Bear! No! No! A man's voice this time, screaming in agony. The sound of wet tearing. Then silence. Stop it! Tex screamed, covering his ears. Shut him up. Svensson stepped forward, his face pale as a sheet. Mimicry, he said softly. I've heard stories from the Cree elders. They say the Stick Indians steal voices. They use them to lure you off the trail. You hear a baby crying or a woman screaming, you run to help, and you run right into the slaughterhouse. The Alpha looked at Svensson. He tilted his massive head like a curious dog. Then he let out a sound that wasn't a mimic. It was a low, guttural chuckling. Huh, huh, huh. He wasn't scared of us. He was mocking us. He's stalling, I realized. He's making noise. He's calling for backup. I grabbed my pack. Russo, Doc, if he looks like he's going to break that chain, you put a bullet in his brainstem. Do not hesitate, Tex, stay low. Where are you going, boss? Russo asked, his eyes wide, fixed on the monster. Svensson and I are hitting the trail, I said, checking my mag. He's mimicking Jessica. That means he's hurt her recently. That means she might still be alive. I walked up to the creature one last time. I wanted him to know I wasn't afraid. I leaned in close, just out of biting range. We're coming for her, I said. The Alpha stopped laughing. He leaned forward, straining against the chains, and whispered in a voice that was a perfect copy of my own mother, a voice I hadn't heard in 20 years, since she died of cancer. Don't go in the dark, Elias. The bogeyman is waiting. I stumbled back. It was impossible. He couldn't know that name. He couldn't know her voice. Unless he could read more than just sound. Unless there was a psychic component to this predator. I turned my back on him before I lost my nerve. Let's go, I told Svensson. Move out. We left the clearing, leaving Russo and Doc to guard a demon that spoke with the voices of the dead. We headed up the mountain, following the drag trail into the black timber, and every step of the way I could hear him laughing behind us. I need to ask you something serious. We all know parrots can mimic human speech. We know lyrebirds can mimic chainsaws. But imagine a 900-pound apex predator that uses your mother's voice or your child's cry to lure you into a trap. If you were hiking alone and heard a family member screaming for help off the trail, would you run to save them? Or would you know it's a trap? Tell me in the comments. Type help if you'd run to save them, or type trap if you'd stay on the trail. I need to know how many of you would survive a Sasquatch encounter. And hit subscribe, because we are about to enter the pantry, and what we found inside that mine, God, I wish I could forget it. Tracking a man is science. You look for the depression in the moss, the broken twig at knee height, the disturbance in the topsoil. It's a puzzle you solve with logic. Tracking a monster, that is purely instinct. You don't look for prints. You look for the absence of nature. You look for the silence. We left Russo and Doc at the kill zone to guard the prisoner. It was just me and Svensson now, moving up the mountain into the deep timber. Svensson was on point with his 45-70 lever action. I was covering his 6 with my suppressed SIG P226 and a handheld thermal monocular. The drag trail that the Alpha had left wasn't just a path through the woods. It was a highway. About a quarter-mile up from the river, the terrain shifted. We left the soft, muddy riverbank and hit the granite spine of the mountain. The slope pitch increased to 45 degrees. It was brutal, lung-burning climbing. Every step was a fight against gravity, slipping on loose shale and wet pine needles. Under the green glow of my night vision, the world looked like a distorted nightmare. Shadows stretched and moved. Every swaying branch looked like a limb reaching out to grab us. Svensson stopped suddenly about 20 minutes into the climb. He didn't speak. He just pointed his rifle barrel at a dense thicket of blackberry thorns to our left. I moved up, scanning with the thermal. Heat? I whispered. No, Svensson said softly. History. He reached into the thorns with his gloved hand and pulled out a piece of fabric. It disintegrated as soon as he touched it. crumbling into gray dust. But I could see what it used to be. It was a red bandana, the kind with the paisley print. Cotton, Svensson noted. Rotting. This has been here a long time. Maybe 10 years, maybe 20. We kept moving. The air grew thinner, sharper. The sweat on the back of my neck started to freeze. 50 yards further up, we found the second marker. It was a hiking boot, a heavy leather Vask boot, the Sundowner model. I recognized it because my dad used to wear them in the 90s. It was sitting upright on a rock almost casually. I knelt down to inspect it. The leather was green with moss. The laces were still tied in a double knot. I shone my light inside. There was no foot, just a dark organic stain in the sole where the fluids had drained out years ago. The leg was pulled out, I whispered, the bile rising in my throat. Or it rotted off. He didn't lose this, Svensson said, scanning the dark tree line above us. It fell off while he was being dragged. The creature didn't stop to pick it up, it was just cargo. That's when the realization hit me. We weren't just following Jessica's trail. We were walking through a graveyard of the missing. Every 50 yards we found something else. A yellow Sony Walkman cassette player, rusted into a solid block of orange iron. A pair of shattered aviator sunglasses. A child's plastic lunchbox, He-Man themed, half buried in the dirt. My stomach churned. The missing 411. The stories of people vanishing into thin air in national parks. The berries pickers who disappear in seconds. The experienced hikers who walk off the trail and are never seen again. They didn't get lost. They didn't fall into ravines. They were taken. They were harvested. This trail was a supply route, a logistical line that this clan of Sasquatch had been using for decades, maybe centuries, to haul their catch-up to the processing plant. Look at the stone, Svensson said, pointing his light at the ground. Look at the wear pattern. I looked closely. The granite bedrock wasn't rough. In the center of the path, a groove about 2 feet wide had been worn smooth, polished. Thousands of trips, I muttered. Heavy loads, dragged over and over again. We reached the timberline at 200 hours. The trees thinned out, replaced by jagged rock and ice. The moon was blocked by heavy storm clouds, making the darkness absolute. Ahead of us, the cliff face rose up like a black wall, 500 feet high. It looked like the end of the world. Where did he go? I whispered. The trail seemed to dead end at the solid rock wall. Svensson holstered his rifle and pulled out a thermal flare but didn't light it. He walked toward a massive cluster of boulders at the base of the cliff. He stopped about 10 feet away and wrinkled his nose. He turned to look at me, his face pale green in the NVG light. Here, he said. The smell. It's concentrated. I walked up next to him. The smell hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just the wet dog smell anymore. It was sharper. Chemical, ammonia, sulfur, and underneath that, the sweet, cloying stench of rotting meat. It smelled like a lion's den at the zoo, but amplified by the confined space. Svensson reached out and pushed aside a curtain of thick, hanging moss that covered a fissure in the rocks. Behind it wasn't a natural cave. It was a square timber-framed hole. Beams of hand-hewn cedar, black with age and rot, were holding up the mountain. Silver mine, I whispered. This whole range was mined in the 1920s. They abandoned it when the veins dried up. They didn't abandon it, Svensson said darkly. New tenants moved in. The darkness inside the mouth of the mine was absolute. My thermal optic couldn't penetrate deep enough. The cold air blowing out from the earth created a wall that blocked the sensors. It just looked like a black void, a throat waiting to swallow us. But on the ground, right at the entrance, we found the sign we needed. Caught on a splinter of the rotting timber frame was a single muddy smear of blue nylon. I picked it up. It matched the fabric of the lanyard the Alpha was wearing. It matched Jessica's jacket. It was fresh. The mud was still wet. She's inside, I said, checking the chamber of my pistol. Press check. Safety off. Svensson looked at me. I could see the fear in his eyes. He was a brave man, a professional hunter. But standing at the mouth of that mine, he looked small. Miller, he said, his voice trembling. You know what predators do with surplus food, right? Leopards hang it in trees. Crocodiles shove it under logs to rot. They don't usually keep it. We get in, we get the girl, we get out, I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. We enter in a tactical stack. Slice the pie on every corner. Stay off the walls. If you see movement, you drop it. No warning shots. What if there are more of them? He asked. Then we make them choke on 5. 56, I lied. I knew if the whole clan was in there, 2 guns wouldn't be enough. We stepped across the threshold. The air temperature dropped 20 degrees instantly. The silence of the forest was replaced by the oppressive, dripping echo of the underground. The smell of ammonia became suffocating. We were leaving the world of men. We were walking into the pantry of the gods, and the door behind us felt like it was closing. There is a specific kind of fear you feel underground. It isn't just the darkness. It's the weight. You can feel the millions of tons of rock hanging over your head, waiting for an excuse to crush you. It's a primal claustrophobia, the feeling of being swallowed by the earth. Svensson and I moved into the drift. That's the mining term for a horizontal tunnel. We were walking in a tactical crouch, weapons up, scanning for thermal signatures. The air inside wasn't stagnant. It was moving. A cold, damp draft blew against our faces, carrying that sickening smell of ammonia and copper deeper into our lungs. It tasted like blood and bleach. The tunnel went straight back for about 100 yards, narrow and suffocating, before opening up into a larger chamber. A stope where the old miners had blasted out a vein of silver ore a century ago. The ceiling here was 30 feet high. The floor was uneven, littered with piles of debris. At first, under the green glow of my night vision goggles, I thought it was just mine tailings, discarded rock and wood. Then I stepped on something that crunched. It wasn't the crisp snap of dry wood. It was the wet, splintering sound of calcium. I looked down. Partially buried in the gray clay was a femur, a thigh bone. It was too thick to be a deer, too long to be a bear. It was human, and it had been snapped in half, spiraled, to get to the marrow inside. I shined my illuminator around the pile. A hiking boot with the foot still inside. A shredded North Face backpack. A skull, crushed flat like a soda can. God almighty, Svensson whispered, his voice echoing too loudly in the silence. It's a midden heap, like a rat's nest. But it wasn't the bones that stopped us. It was the sound. In the back of the chamber, where the shadows were deepest and the thermal optic was washing out, came a sound. Hoo, hoo, breathing. It wasn't the deep, chest-rattling growl of a predator. It was the shallow, terrified, fluid-filled gasping of something small, something broken. I raised my weapon, thumbing the fire selector to semi-auto. Jessica, I called out softly. My name is Miller. We're here to help. The breathing stopped. Then, a voice. Weak, cracked from dehydration. A voice that hadn't used words in a long time. Don't make noise. The big man. He'll hear you. It wasn't Jessica. It was a man's voice. I signaled Svensson to hold security at the tunnel entrance, the fatal funnel, while I moved toward the voice. I stepped over the piles of refuse, my boots sliding in the muck. I switched on my weapon light, flooding the back of the cave with 1,000 lumens of blinding white LED light. I will never, as long as I live, forget what I saw in that light. The back wall of the mine had been excavated. The creatures had dug into the soft clay, creating alcoves, like shelves in a root cellar, or prison cells. Dug into the earth were 5 deep pits, roughly 4 feet wide and 6 feet deep. I looked into the first pit. A man was huddled in the bottom, curled into a ball in the mud. He was emaciated, skin stretched tight over bone, beard matted with filth, eyes pale and blind from living in total darkness. He was wearing the tattered remains of a flannel shirt. He shielded his eyes from my light, whimpering. Who are you? I asked, my voice shaking. What is your name? I'm Greg, he croaked. I went hiking, on the Pacific Crest Trail. When, Greg? I asked, kneeling down. When did you go hiking? 2018, he whispered. Is it 2019 yet? I felt the blood drain from my face. 2018. This man had been missing for 5 years. He was a cold case. The news had reported he fell into a ravine. He hadn't fallen. He had been here, in the dark, for 5 years. I moved to the next pit, empty, just bones and a weird straw-like bedding. The third pit, a woman. She was younger. She was wearing a blue tactical jacket, Jessica's jacket. She was curled in a fetal position, rocking back and forth, humming a nursery rhyme to herself. Her hair was white, not from age, but from shock. Jessica? I asked. She didn't look up, she just kept rocking. Jessica, I'm here to take you home. Your dad sent me. At the word, Dad, she stopped rocking. She looked up. Her eyes were wild, dilated, feral. You can't, she whispered. I can, I said, holstering my pistol and reaching down. Give me your hand. We're getting you out of here right now. I can't walk, she sobbed. I can't run. Why not? My legs, she wept, pointing to her shins. He fixed them so I wouldn't run away. I shined the light down at her legs. I've seen combat trauma. I've seen IED blasts. But this was surgical cruelty. Her legs were bent at impossible angles. The tibia and fibula in both legs had been deliberately snapped and then allowed to heal crooked. I looked back at Greg in the first pit. He wasn't standing. He was sitting in the mud. His legs were twisted too. The realization hit me like a physical punch to the gut. I nearly vomited right there in the cave. They weren't just prisoners. They were livestock. The Sasquatch didn't hunt every day. Winters in the Cascades are brutal. The deer move to the lowlands. The berries die. So they stocked up. They took hikers. They brought them here. And to keep them from running away, they hobbled them. They broke their legs, but kept them alive. They fed them scraps, gave them water, kept them warm enough to survive the winter, until they were needed. It's a pantry, Svensson choked out from the doorway. He had walked up behind me and was staring into the pits, horror etched on his face. Miller, it's a goddamn meat locker. They keep the meat fresh by keeping it alive. Svensson, grab the guy, I yelled, snapping out of the shock. I've got the girl. We can't carry both, Svensson yelled back. It's 3 miles of steep grade. Just grab him. I adrenaline lifted Jessica out of the pit. She weighed nothing, maybe 80 pounds. She screamed in agony as her broken legs dragged against the dirt, a high, thin sound that pierced the silence. I'm sorry, I whispered, strapping her to my back with a carabiner and webbing. Help me! Greg screamed from the other pit, reaching his skeletal arms up toward the light. Don't leave me, please, not in the dark. Svensson reached down and grabbed Greg's arm. He heaved, pulling the man out of the mud. Greg was weeping, laughing, hysterical. Movement! I yelled. Svensson, look sharp. In the corner of the room, near a 4th pit I hadn't checked, something moved. I swung my light. It wasn't a person. It was a pile of furs. No, it was a nest. And in the nest something small and gray hissed at me. An infant, a baby Sasquatch. It looked at me with those same amber eyes, baring tiny teeth. Let's go. Now, I screamed. As we turned to run back toward the tunnel, the ground vibrated. Boom, boom, boom. It wasn't coming from the entrance. It was coming from deeper inside the mountain, from the tunnels below us. The alpha we caught outside. He was just the sentry. He was the guard dog. But the rest of the clan, the hunters, the mothers, the elders, they were home, and they had heard Jessica scream. Contact rear! Svensson screamed, dropping Greg to raise his rifle. From the deep dark of the mine shaft, a massive shape emerged into the edge of our light. It was bigger than the alpha. It was female, her chest broad and scarred, her fur matted with gray clay, and behind her, 2 more sets of amber eyes glowing in the dark. They saw us stealing their food. They saw us in their nursery, and they roared. This wasn't a warning roar. This wasn't a territory display. This was the sound of a butcher seeing rats in his kitchen. Run! I yelled to Svensson. Leave him! We have to run! I can't leave him! Svensson yelled, trying to drag the crippled Greg with one hand while firing his lever action with the other. Boom! Boom! The 45-70 rounds thundered in the confined space, deafening us. The female Sasquatch charged. She moved with terrifying speed for something so massive, scrambling over the piles of bones like a spider. I raised my pistol and fired blindly into the darkness, the muzzle flashes lighting up the nightmare for split seconds. We were in the belly of the beast, and the beast was waking up. There is no training manual for a firefight inside a mine shaft. The acoustics amplify every shot into a concussion grenade. The dust from the ceiling falls like snow, blinding you. The smell of cordite mixes with the smell of centuries-old rot. And the enemy can see in the dark. And you can't. Contact rear, close range, Svensson screamed. The female Sasquatch, the matriarch, was on us. She didn't run like a human. She flowed over the piles of debris using her knuckles to pivot, covering 30 feet in the blink of an eye. She was screaming, a sound that wasn't fear, but pure, protective rage. We were in her nursery. We were stealing her food. Svensson leveled his Marlin 4570 guide gun. This is a rifle designed to stop charging rhinoceroses. Boom! The sound inside that cave was physical. It felt like someone slapped me on both ears with open palms. My night vision goggles bloomed, turned completely white, from the muzzle flash. I was blind. "Move, Miller, move!" Svensson yelled, racking the lever for another shot. I had Jessica strapped to my back. She was 80 pounds of dead weight screaming in my ear, her broken legs banging against my equipment belt with every step I took. I turned and fired my SIG P226 one-handed into the darkness, just trying to create a wall of lead. Pop, 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 pop. 9mm rounds against a creature like that is like throwing gravel at a tank. But it made her flinch. Svensson fired again. Boom! I heard the wet slap of the heavy bullet hitting meat. The matriarch howled, a sound that shattered glass and crashed into the timber support beams. Dust and rocks rained down on us. "Greg, get up!" Svensson was screaming. I looked back. The scene was a nightmare. Svensson had Greg, the emaciated male prisoner, by the collar of his flannel shirt. He was trying to drag him, but Greg's legs were useless. He was plowing through the mud, an anchor that was getting us all killed. "Leave me!" Greg shrieked, his eyes bulging. "She's coming. Run!" Out of the shadows behind the wounded matriarch, two more shapes emerged. Smaller, faster. The soldiers of the clan. They ignored the gunfire. They wanted blood. One of them lunged. He didn't go for Svensson. He went for the slow target. A massive, hairy hand shot out of the gloom and grabbed Greg's ankle. Greg didn't even have time to scream again. He was yanked backward with such violence that his shirt ripped in Svensson's hands. He slid across the muddy floor, clawing at the dirt, his fingernails leaving deep furrows in the clay. "No, no, please." Then he was pulled into the darkness. The sound that followed, the wet snap of a spine and the sudden silence, will haunt me until the day I die. "Svensson, move. He's gone." I grabbed Svensson's harness and yanked him backward. He was frozen, staring at the empty space where a human being had just been. "We have to go," I roared, snapping him out of it. We turned and sprinted toward the tunnel entrance. Running with a combat load is hard. Running with a human being on your back over uneven ground while being chased by monsters is impossible. My lungs burned. My quads felt like they were tearing. Jessica was sobbing rhythmically against my neck. We hit the fatal funnel, the narrow drift leading to the exit. The air grew colder. I could see the faint gray light of the night sky ahead. "They're gaining," Svensson yelled. I could hear them. Thump, thump, thump. They were running on the walls. They were using the timber beams like monkey bars, closing the distance with terrifying agility. We burst out of the mine entrance and into the cold night air. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. "Frag out!" I yelled. I pulled the pin on an M67 fragmentation grenade, my last one, and dropped it right at the mouth of the tunnel. We dove behind the massive boulders at the trailhead. Crump. The explosion was muffled by the earth, but the shockwave blew dust and shrapnel out of the mine entrance. The old rotting timbers at the mouth of the cave gave way. With a groan that sounded like the mountain was dying, the entrance collapsed. Tons of rock and shale slid down, sealing the hole. Silence returned to the mountain. For a second, all I could hear was my own heart hammering against my ribs and Jessica's whimpering. "Did we get them?" Svensson gasped, reloading his rifle with trembling hands. "We bought time," I said, "but that won't hold them forever. They know other ways out. We need to move. Now." I keyed my radio. "Russo, Doc, status." Static. Then Russo's voice, panic-stricken. "Boss, we have movement, multiple bogies. They're coming down the ridge. They're surrounding us." "The prisoner?" I asked. "He's awake. He's screaming. He's calling them in." "Put a bullet in him," I ordered. "Execute the target. We are coming in hot." "Negative, we can't." The radio cut to static, then the sound of heavy machine gun fire echoing up from the valley below. "They're hitting the team," I told Svensson. "We have to get down there." The descent was a blur of pain. We didn't hike. We slid. We surfed down the shale slopes, tearing our uniforms, bruising our bones. Jessica passed out from the pain halfway down, her head lolling against my shoulder. I thanked God for that. She didn't need to see what was coming next. We reached the tree line where we had left the team 20 minutes later. The forest was quiet again. Too quiet. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the mist. "Russo?" I whispered into the comms. "Doc?" Nothing. We moved into the clearing, the kill zone where we had chained the Alpha. It was a slaughterhouse. The trees were shredded by machine gun fire. Brass casings littered the mud like confetti. Russo was lying near the riverbank. His helmet was cracked. His chest plate had taken a massive impact. He was unconscious, bleeding from the nose but breathing. Doc was gone. Tex was gone. And the tree where we had chained the Alpha? It was snapped in half. The heavy logging chains were still wrapped around the trunk, but the cuffs, the hardened steel cuffs, had been twisted and sheared off. We were alone. 2 men, 1 unconscious soldier, and a crippled girl. And somewhere in the dark around us an entire clan of angry, vengeful Sasquatch was watching. I looked at the mud. There were tracks everywhere, but they weren't random. They were circling us. They weren't attacking yet. They were waiting. "Why aren't they killing us?" Svensson whispered, his back to mine, rifle raised. I looked at Jessica, still strapped to my back. Then I looked at the empty chains. "Because they want her back," I said. "And they want their brother back. They think we still have him." I checked my ammo. 1 magazine left. Svensson had 4 rounds. Russo was out cold. We had to make a choice that goes against everything they teach you in the Marines. We couldn't fight our way out. We had to negotiate. "Svensson," I said, my voice dead calm, "get the flare gun." "For the chopper?" he asked. "No," I said, looking into the amber eyes glowing in the tree line. "To light up the stage. If we're going to die, I want to look them in the eye. I've been in combat zones where the enemy wanted to kill me for my flag, my religion, or my land. But I have never looked into the eyes of an enemy that wanted to kill me simply because I was meat. We were surrounded, outgunned, and we were carrying the one thing they wanted most. What happens next is the most controversial decision of my military career. I had to choose between saving my team or saving the mission. If you think I should have handed the girl over to save my men, type team in the comments. If you think I should have fought to the death to save her, type mission. Click subscribe. Because the finale is going to change everything you think you know about the government and these creatures. There is a moment in every nightmare where you wake up, but in the real world, sometimes the waking up is worse than the dream. We were back to back in the mud. Me, Svensson, and the unconscious body of Russo. Jessica was lying between us, moaning softly. I told Svensson to fire the flare. Pop, hiss. The magnesium flare shot up 200 feet, bathing the clearing in a wavering, blood-red light. The shadows danced, and in that red light we saw them. They weren't just in front of us. They were everywhere, standing behind the trees, crouched on the rocks, hanging from the lower branches of the cedars. I counted 12, maybe 15. The Alpha, the one we had chained, was standing in the center. He was favoring his left leg, and the fur on his neck was matted with blood where the dart had been. He looked at me. There was no anger in his face anymore, just recognition. He raised a hand, not to strike, but to signal. "They're going to rush us," Svensson whispered, shouldering his rifle. "This is it, Miller. It's been an honor." I tightened my grip on my pistol. "Aim for the eyes," I said. "Make them pay for every inch." The Alpha opened his mouth to roar the command to attack. But the sound didn't come. Instead, a different sound tore through the valley. A sound I knew better than my own mother's voice. Thud, 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 thud. The deep, chest-vibrating rhythm of heavy rotors. The trees around us began to whip violently. The mist swirled into a hurricane. I looked up. Hovering just above the tree line, blacked out except for its anti-collision lights, was a beast of the modern age. An MH-47 Chinook, Special Operations variant. And flanking it were 2 AH-6 little birds. "Friendly," Svensson screamed, laughing hysterically. "It's the extract." I didn't laugh, because I saw the markings on the tail. No registration numbers, no flag, just matte black paint. This wasn't the private medical evac I had called. This was a sanitization team. The side door of the Chinook slid open. A minigun, an M134 rotary cannon, spun up with a high-pitched whine. Brrrrt. Have you ever seen a minigun fire at night? It looks like a solid beam of laser light connecting the gun to the target. It fires 3,000 rounds a minute. God's own lawnmower. The tree line disintegrated. The 7.62mm rounds chewed through the ancient cedars like they were paper. The Sasquatch clan didn't stand a chance. I saw bodies, massive, powerful bodies, ripped apart in seconds. The alpha roared and turned to run, but a little bird swept over him, unleashing a barrage of rockets that turned the riverbank into a crater. It wasn't a fight. It was an erasure. Fast ropes dropped from the Chinook. Men in black gear, not camo but solid black, slid down. They hit the ground with professional silence. They weren't moving like rescue teams. They were moving like a cleanup crew. They had gas masks on, no faces visible. "We have the package," I yelled, waving my arms. "Friendly! We have civilians!" The lead operator walked up to me. He didn't offer me a hand. He pointed a suppressed rifle at my chest. "Weapons down," a voice crackled through a speaker on his vest. "On your knees, now. I'm Miller. I'm the contract lead. Knees!" 2 operators grabbed me and zip-tied my hands behind my back. Another team grabbed Svensson. They ignored our protests. They moved to Jessica. They didn't ask her if she was okay. They injected her with something, probably a sedative, and threw her onto a stretcher like a sack of potatoes. Then I saw what they were really there for. They weren't just killing the creatures. They were collecting them. A cargo net was lowered from the Chinook. The operators were dragging the shredded remains of the Sasquatches into the net, and then from the brush they dragged something else. The infant, the one we had seen in the mine. It was alive, screaming, thrashing in a containment bag. "Secure the asset," the lead operator said. I looked at Russo. He was still unconscious. "What about my men?" I screamed over the rotor wash. "Doc and Tex are still out there." The operator looked at me. His goggles were opaque black voids. "There are no survivors in the zone," he said. "Do you understand me, Sergeant Miller? No survivors." I understood. They weren't going to look for Doc or Tex, and they weren't going to report this. They were scrubbing the site. They loaded us onto the bird. As we lifted off, I looked out the back ramp. The little birds were making one last pass over the mine entrance. I saw the flash of incendiary missiles. Thermite or white phosphorus. The mountain exploded in white fire. The mine, the pantry, the bones, the evidence. It was all burning at 3,000 degrees. Jessica's prison was now a crematorium. We flew in silence for 2 hours. We landed at a private airfield in Nevada. I never saw Jessica again. I never saw her father again. The money was wired to my account the next day, but the contact number was disconnected. I spent 3 days in a windowless room being debriefed by men who didn't give their names. They made me sign papers that said if I ever spoke about this, I would be charged with domestic terrorism. They told me that what we saw was a cartel fentanyl lab protected by armed guards. They told me the monsters were hallucinations caused by stress and gas leaks in the mine. They lied, and they knew I knew they were lying. That was 6 months ago. Svensson went back to Africa. He drank himself to death in a bar in Johannesburg last week. The official report said, heart failure. I know better. Russo is in a VA psych ward. He doesn't speak. He just draws pictures of eyes in the dark. And me? I'm a ghost. I move every 3 weeks. I don't use credit cards. But I kept one thing. When they zip-tied me, they didn't check my boot. I reached down and pulled out the ID card. Jessica's ID. The one the Alpha was wearing. This is the proof. Proof that they exist. Proof that they are intelligent. And proof that our government knows exactly what they are and where they live. Why do they let people disappear? Why don't they close the parks? I've thought about that every night, and I think I know the answer. It's a treaty. We get the land, we get the timber, we get the resources. And in exchange, we give them the remote places. We give them the missing 411. We give them a quota. Think about it. Thousands of people vanish every year. No trace, no body, just gone. We aren't the top of the food chain. We are part of the negotiation. So here is my warning to you. If you go into the woods, stay on the trail, carry a gun, and if you hear your name being called from the darkness, if you hear a baby crying or a woman screaming for help, do not be a hero. Turn around, run, and never look back, because the things in the dark aren't just hungry. They are waiting for you. Miller racks the slide of his pistol. He looks directly into the lens. This is Miller, signing off.